Alright, everybody, hello and welcome to the reserve team. As always, I am Shaun, and we're continuing today with our season preview series for all of the A-League sides. You will have caught earlier this week our Sydney FC season preview. Today, we have the beaten grand finalist and runners-up in the league itself, Melbourne City, to talk about. Now, pretty much every piece of content we've put out throughout the course of the week that has Brand and myself on it, there's kind of a thinly veiled Melbourne City bias. Today, we're letting that chain loose, and we are just going to be as biased as possible. It'll be insufferable for fans of other clubs, but I think we're all very much looking forward to it. I'm not alone though. We are joined by a couple of guests to help talk through Melbourne City and the fan base as well. First, making his debut on the channel, first appearance, will be as gentle with him as humanly possible, Isaac Wiles from the reserve team. Isaac, thanks for joining us, mate.
How's it going? Great to be here, Shaun.
Perfect. And as always, pulling out that red kit over there, and he's got the sash in the background from the original ISC kits, Bran Gibson. Bran, how's your week been?
Been doing well, thanks. Thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to talking Melbourne City, and as you said, sort of not having to worry about being too overly City focused. It should be a good one.
I still expect comments and shady people coming and hitting me up over on Twitter, but that's fine. That's what this episode is supposed to be, so it's the perfect time for it.
As you said, we try to rein in our bias, but today I don't think we have to. It should be fun.
Bias is fine as long as we acknowledge it. And I think every time we talk about it, we do. But, it's fine. At least now we have an excuse and we have a topic specific to Melbourne City. I'll quickly run you guys through the Melbourne City history, or the Melbourne Heart history, Melbourne City history, in a quick little spiel. But then we're going to go to you guys to get some of your fondest memories, including what initially drew you towards Melbourne Heart. I think one of the fascinating parts that we'll probably talk about a few different times is the natural comparison that comes with the other side of Melbourne, Melbourne Victory, and how they differentiated themselves in the first 5 seasons of the A-League, and then how the two clubs have differentiated themselves over time. But for those of you that aren't aware, people that might be watching either interstate or internationally, at the beginning of the A-League, the FFA adopted a very strict one city, one team policy to allow each competition side to thrive at an elite level in the early stages. Because of that policy, it always meant that there was only going to be one team in Melbourne, one team in Sydney, one team in Adelaide. And despite early success for each of those bigger city teams and the stability that they provided to the league, and those two sides, Melbourne Victory and Sydney FC, were the first sides to run at a profit in the division, there was a moratorium in place that would ensure each of those clubs had 5 years to secure their market share, to secure their catchment, before any additional sides would be added in their particular areas or in their particular cities. Meaning that Melbourne City effectively had a 5-year advantage on any additional side that was going to be joining. Throughout that period, that 5-year period, a variety of different bids came through, interested in joining for the 2009-2010 and then eventually 2010-2011 season as a second team in Melbourne. Of the 3 final bids that made it through, Southern Cross FC, Melbourne Heart, and the interestingly named Melbourne City, each of them put their bids together, and it was in June 2009 that it was announced that Melbourne Heart bid had been handed the licence for the 2010-2011 season, with a local group comprising of a few different prominent businessmen, the Melbourne Storm, the local NRL side, and a full consortium of people in and around Victorian football. Just after that announcement, a local newspaper poll allowed the public to submit their name preferences for the second team, with options including Sporting Melbourne FC, Melburnians, Melbourne Revolution, and Melbourne Heart FC. Hart was the runaway leader in that poll, but the announcement of the new name was delayed due to the objections of the AFL around the use of Melbourne Football and Club in the names of the team. The Lord Mayor's Heart of Melbourne appeal also lodged an intellectual property conflict lawsuit that was rejected, allowing Melbourne Heart FC to be formally announced in February 2010, a few months prior to their initial season beginning. Initial mediocrity on the field in the first 2 seasons gave way to a poor run of form and difficulty engaging a football community already invested and allied with either their local community sides, MPL teams, and of course Melbourne Victory. They finished 8th in their inaugural season, 2010-2011, 6th with their first finals appearance, handed a 3-0 drubbing by Perth Glory away from home in 2011-2012. Second bottom, 9th place finish in 2012-2013 when they set almost a record for the lowest amount of goals scored in a season, and then their first wooden spoon in the 2013-2014 season. In January 2014, after months of speculation, it was announced that the City Football Group, owners of Manchester City and New York City FC overseas, had completed a takeover of the Melbourne Heart for 12 million Australian dollars, and they announced a rebranding as Melbourne City Football Club to take effect from the 2014-2015 season. Gentlemen, it's a lot to kind of condense into a couple of paragraphs there, and there's a lot that happened in that opening 4 seasons of Melbourne Heart itself. We'll start with that era. I'll go to you first, Bran. What are some of your earliest and fondest memories of Melbourne Heart, and what drew you to the club originally?
sort of drew me to the club was, well, I actually remember when it was announced that they were coming into the league. So sort of prior to that, I was, a semi-fan of the A-League. I'd watch games. If you'd asked me who I went for, I would have said the Victory just because they were the Melbourne team. But I remember when the Heart came in, I hadn't really fully jumped on board with the Victory, so I saw the Heart as the perfect opportunity to get involved in the A-League and get behind a club from the start. So I was like, yep, cool, here we go. And then my first, probably biggest memory would be the first derby. I remember going with my mates from high school, sitting up there. John Aloisi scored, and just how full Amy Park was and how buzzing it was. And the other good thing that I really enjoyed was, the red and blue contrast. So it really, really felt passionate, and the suspense and just the atmosphere was great, and I was hooked from there.
Yeah, for the first 4 or 5 seasons, it didn't really take any courage to follow Melbourne Victory because they outnumbered everybody in their stadium like 10 or 12 to 1. But that little pocket of red just contrasted against the full stands of navy. It's great to see Amy Park when you can't see any green. That's always the best part of the football calendar as far as I'm concerned. Isaac, same question for you. What are some of your earliest memories of Melbourne Heart, and what drew you to the club originally?
Well, I'm actually kind of a different story in that I wasn't a supporter of Melbourne Heart. I come from a pretty strong AFL family background. It's just AFL mad heads. And I remember it got to the off season for AFL, and I was sat there thinking, God, what am I going to do for 6 months? And I was kind of aware of the A League peripherally. And I was like, so I thought, okay, maybe I'll give this a go. I need some more sport in my life. And I knew enough about the A League to know that I didn't like Melbourne Victory. I thought their supporters were a bit obnoxious. So I'm like, oh, let's see if City have a game going up. And it was actually the FFA Cup game against Western Sydney in 2016-17, the one that kind of started our run. And I remember going to that game, and I was probably sat 2 bases to the right of what was known as the Melburnians. And I was just pretty much in awe of the way they were singing and standing, and how strong the atmosphere was in contrast to the AFL experience I'd had previously. So that really interested me at first. And I was like, well, this is cool. This is something. And then I decided, well, I'll go to the first A-League game of the seasons. And the first A-League game in Melbourne for that season was the derby against Victory, the famous 4-1 derby, the Tim Cahill goal, and I managed to get a seat into the active support. And from there, I was hooked. There was nothing like it. Being there packed in that little bay with a bunch of diehard Melbourne City fans, Melbourne Victory South End, a football kick away. It was a really unique experience. And I maybe missed 2 or 3 home games since then.
Just from memory, and I could be wrong, was that FFA Cup game like a 5-0 victory? And I think Jakobsen on debut scored a bicycle kick in the first minute?
I think it was 4-1, but I'm pretty sure Jakobsen definitely kicked a bicycle kick.
Yeah.
Tim Cahill with a penalty.
So there's a long running theme through a lot of fantastic moments throughout Melbourne Heart and Melbourne City's history where I've been caught at the bar while they've taken place, and I was at the bar when Jakobsen scored that bicycle kick. And I do have to warn you, there were some tough times, Isaac. It's not all second minute bicycle kicks to start off your Melbourne City career, but yeah, always interesting to see.
Bangers.
Yeah, Tim Cahill bangers. I was also at the bar for that one as well. Thank you for reminding me, Brand. But yeah, some fantastic memories in the recent history.
More often.
I might just not go to games anymore. Maybe that's the key to us winning the title one season.
Well, I'll tell you what, I reckon if you'd been at the bar when Delbridge scored the goal, I reckon VAR would have said no offside and would have counted. So, I mean, was it VAR? Was it offside? Was it Shaun? I don't know.
We'll see if the club can get me like a stool just set up so I can just sit on that at the bar for the entirety of the 90 minutes. But
So like in the 65th minute, instead of making a substitution, it's all right, quick, send Shaun to the bar.
Yeah, perfect. It's a long-running joke amongst the group of people that I go to games with as well. But yeah, some fantastic memories. Even just in that recent period, Isaac, I think it really does go to show that turn of fortunes. Like I've mentioned it there, and we'll talk about it a little bit further in a moment, how they struggled in the early part of the seasons. We really only started winning once that Melbourne City transition started to come in, and the standard that they've set, not just for that A-League side, but also in terms of the investment in the training facilities, in the W League team, in the Youth League team. Like that success was a really difficult time. Obviously, hindsight and sometimes nostalgia come into it a little bit. I think when we speak about Melbourne Heart, it was tough. It was tough watching them a lot of the time. I think there was in that 2012-2013 season a run of about 20 games where we didn't win a game. And then there was the wooden spoon season in 2013, 2014. Those John Aloisi years, they were the worst brand of football that I think I've seen in the A-League from any side. And I'd include the likes of Central Coast and New Zealand Knights in that conversation as well. But thankfully, we've moved on to happier times and we're recruiting more people and getting new fans like yourself, Isaac, which helps the club and it helps the overall A-League as well. The last 5 finishes for the club, we were 4th in 2015, 2016, 4th again the year after, 3rd, 5th, and then last season, 2nd, and a maiden grand final appearance for the league itself, or for the club. What are some of your season highlights from last season? Bran, I'll give you the floor again.
Well, the big season highlight, I reckon, would be the preliminary final, the defeating Western United. A lot of pressure on that game. You know, we just had our best season. I think it was our highest ever finish. It was the most wins we'd ever had in a season, and it was our highest ever point total. So you're like, this is great. We're all trending in the right direction. If we'd lost that one final, it would have all been for nothing. So I felt like the pressure really built and hinged on that game. You know, having never made a grand final, if we'd gone there and then lost to Western United in their first season, I thought that would have just been a huge negative. So I think the fact that we actually won it turned it into a massive positive. It sort of made the whole season worthwhile. Making that grand final, despite the results, I still think that was a great highlight as well. You know, just sort of being there from a fan point of view, the suspense, the tension, the unique feeling of being in lockdown in Melbourne. So, like, you know, we couldn't go to Sydney. I know we all 3 of us love traveling to away games. We couldn't get there. You couldn't even travel 5 kilometers to go watch the game with your mates. So I just remember sitting at home, FaceTiming people while watching the game. But I think the big highlight was that preliminary final win and then ultimately that grand final experience.
Yeah, I mean, that's been the thing for the last kind of 5-6 seasons, is that we promise quite a bit, usually in the early and middle parts of the seasons, have a fadeaway, and then everyone just kind of, not gets cynical about it, but at least starts to think, oh, you know, we're going to get done by Wellington away in the finals or something like that, or we'll end up drawing victory in a semi-final and they'll win 3-0. But there are a couple of results this past season. I think the 2-0 victory away in Sydney was a very big one. That was post-lockdown, of course, no crowds in that particular fixture, which probably helped us a little bit. But then also that Western United result as well, which just kind of made us all believe that little bit more, that maybe this could be the year that we could do it. Maybe we can stand up to the challenges and the pressure that come with it. Isaac, what about for you? What are some of your highlights from the most recent season?
Well, it's been an interesting season where, for the most part, we've played pretty good football. But, I mean, the whole thing about Melbourne City, in my experience, is that it's been one step forward, one step back, and at the end, you're kind of at the same spot that you were at the start of the season. So I was pretty cautious with my optimism throughout the season, but I remember when we played Perth Glory away, and that was back when, you know, the top 2 spot was still definitely, it was nobody's yet. It was a really important game. Historically, we don't do well away to Perth. I mean, not many teams do, to be fair. And, you know, a beautiful first half of football. We go 3-0 up, and then pretty early into the second half, Perth get a goal, another one's coming, all the momentum's going their way. And that's where I start to feel, yep, this is the city that I know. I can just see that third goal coming, and we're just going to throw away a perfectly good win that would have meant so much in the league. But miraculously, and thanks to, I mean, Casper hitting the crossbar, we managed to hold on, and that's when I started to buy into this team and seeing how they were different from Melbourne City teams in the past, and how, you know, they have the potential to do big things in the league. So I think that was a real significant game for me.
Yeah, I think you made 2 excellent points as well about, like, you know, the playing history and playing style. Those early seasons, like, I liked John Van Skip. I think he did a fantastic job. But I think when you kind of look back on those years where we had, like, the likes of Aaron Moy, Navio, Fornaroli, all on top fixtures, he could really manage attacking football really well, but we never married it with, like, defensive success. It was very much we were going to win 4-3 or 3-2,
exactly.
and couldn't really defend. And then maybe the club was guilty of going too far in the opposite direction with Warren Joyce, where we were actually okay defensively, but his season, I think it was his final season when we finished 5th, Riley McGree, central midfielder, was our leading scorer with 8 goals. Richie Delat, who's a right back or a centre back, got 7. Like, we just weren't able to score, so we couldn't really find that balance. I think the thing Monbert did very well is that he struck that key balance between defensive unity and good attacking football, where we did both quite well, which is always a good step in the right direction, but there are some challenges that are going to come up ahead of the future season now that we are moving into a different coaching environment. We'll talk about that further in a little bit though. The stadium for Melbourne City, of course, is Amy Park. I think we are, of course, acknowledging our bias as always, but when it's full and when it's rocking and when it's got that Christmas derby in the build-up, or usually consistently in regular seasons, probably not this year, it is one of the best venues in the league itself. Kit Corner, we're in our second year of a 3-year deal with Puma. I've got the polo shirt on. Brown, you've got the old Nike kit on. And you've got the old ISC one in the background there. What do you guys think, just high level, quick 1-2 sentences, what do you guys think about the kit offering this season? I'll go with you first, Isaac. You can have the first run at this one.
Love the third kit. Love the pinstripe kit. The away's cool. Something different. I like the black. Don't love the home kit this year. Looks very tight, very snug. I don't love the one singular button that's kind of like a fake collar that's not really a collar. But I mean, 2 out of 3 is not bad.
And our kit expert, try and keep this one to 5 or 10 minutes if you can. Bram, what are your thoughts on the kits for the season ahead?
I think I like them because they're something different. I think generally, for the most part, when you're talking about what Melbourne City's kits are going to be each season, you can pick them straight away. It's going to be an all blue one. There's going to be a red and white stripe one, and the away kit is the only one where you really go, well, this could be just about anything. I'm a little disappointed that the home kit is just all blue again. Yeah. Mumbai City, who are part of the City Football Group, their home kit has sort of like a funky hexagonal. Is that it? Hexagonal?
Probably not.
It's
I think it's hexagonal, is what you're looking for.
All right, okay. It's got a funky 6-sided shape pattern sort of overlaid on it. So, something like that would have jazzed it up a little bit. I'm with Isaac. I like the third kit with the pinstripes. I think every City and Heart fan wants like a classic red and white stripe kit. But I think with the pinstripes, they've tried something different. It's sort of, it fits within the realms of, the nod to our past, but it's also something creative and new. So I like them.
Yeah, I don't mind this year's home kit, to be honest. I kind of like the white accents on it being a little bit bolder, but if it was white shorts, I would love it all that much more. Like, it would be such a clean kit if it had that. I'm not sure what... I know that they're trying to do certain different things about giving each of the City football teams, they don't want them to look just like Manchester City Junior. So, like you've mentioned, Mumbai has their own different kind of like style that they're going with. Ours is a little bit generic, but a little bit different still. It's hard to see on it, but there is some sort of like background styling on the actual blue of the home kit as well. And they're doing the same sort of thing with New York City. And I think they've got like a blue with a pinstripe, kind of like similar to a New York Yankees style, but inverted colours almost. So they are trying to do a little bit different in terms of the Puma kits to give each of those sides a different signature and a different flair. But again, I just really like to see white shorts, which is it's a weird Australian football complaint because we talk about green shorts all the time with our national teams, but white shorts for Melbourne City I think is in the same category.
Well, just quickly on the green shorts with the Socceroos, the big thing was they wanted light colours to match light colours. They didn't want that light and dark. But with light blue and white, those are 2 light colours. So I don't understand why we can't have white shorts.
So that, I think, from memory, and I could be wrong, and by all means, if you do know the answer to this, drop it in the comment section below, or blast me on Twitter, because you guys will anyway. But I think that was a FIFA directive where they said you have to have a light kit and a dark kit to try and get signifying things. But then, like, Germany still had black shorts and a white top, and Brazil still had blue shorts and a yellow shirt. So it applied to some, but didn't apply to others. And that's why I think we're starting to see a better colour palette starting to come back through. Like, Nigeria's kits are fantastic every year, and we've got a million different things in Australia that we could work into a national team kit. There's a million different things in Melbourne we could work into a fantastic kit, but we just haven't really taken that jump yet. But I do think they're nice, and hopefully, I'm sure once payday comes around, once we get past Christmas and all the expenses that come up now that we're out of lockdown, hopefully we'll have a whole view of kits all throughout the stadium this season. We now jump into probably the trickier part, and one of, I think, probably the longer discussions that we're going to have relating to the squad itself. We have lost a couple of players. There are, for a variety of different clubs in and around the league, a lot of players that have left, or a lot of contracts that have been mulched. Some of that is relating to, the obvious pandemic in 2020 and clubs trying to reduce operating costs throughout the course of the season. I don't think we're going to see many clubs, even the top tier clubs, have full squads of 25 this year. At the same time, though, that loss of players to the league itself does open up opportunities for other players to potentially get chances to play senior football. The outs for Melbourne City, and I'll read these off as a list and then I'll get both of your thoughts. Josh Brillante has left to move to Xanthi in the second division of Greece. Markel Susueta actually left before the end of last season, but he's now re-signed with MacArthur, which I think is very, very interesting. Denny Jonro, promising midfield youngster, has also moved to MacArthur at the end of his contract. Lockie Wales, much derided, perhaps positively, perhaps negatively, has gone to Western United. Dean Bazanis has moved to Sutton United after spending most of last season on the bench. Gianluca Iannucci, Joe Gauci, Yaya Dukali all released from their contracts. Some have re-signed with other clubs. And then we've got 2 loan signings out. First time we've really seen this from the club. Rami Nazarene heading to the Newcastle Jets in search of first-team football, and Moody Najjar heading to MacArthur FC. Isaac, I'll give you first run at it. Of those players, which one jumps out at you as being potentially the biggest loss? And any other ones there that you think are interesting to see how they'll be replaced for the upcoming season?
I think Josh Belante, that's a really big out. I think what he does for our team is massive. The way he can, mop up incoming pressure, the way he can slow down when other teams are starting to build attack. I think he's one of those footballers that you don't always notice what they do until they're gone. That being said, I mean, Aidan O'Neill coming in, huge raps on him. Everyone's speaking of him very highly, but it'll be interesting to see how our team goes without him, because I think he was a real anchor of what made our team so good last year. I think Lockie Wales moving on is for the best. I don't think he's the world's worst footballer that everyone will have you believe, but I think we upgraded on him. I think Naboo's a better footballer. And I like that the club is loaning out Najjar and Najri, because chances are they're probably not going to start many games, and they're in a point in their career development-wise where they need to be playing competitive first-team football every week. We still have them contracted till the end of 2022, so why not send them to clubs that they'll be playing more?
Bram, what are some of your thoughts on the outs and some of the things that Isaac's just added in?
Well, I agree with a lot of what Isaac said, to be honest. I think Brillante is probably the biggest loss. I think Susayeta as well is an interesting one, because he departed the club to go back to Spain because of the COVID lockdown. So, he never really sort of got to have a full impact, and he didn't leave on bad terms, but he left under obviously difficult circumstances. So the fact that he's now come back to the league and has gone to MacArthur, I think, is a bit of a bummer. Again, we don't know if the club had an option of bringing him back and just chose not to, or if MacArthur offered him more money or anything like that. But I think it's a little bit of a bummer that he couldn't, we couldn't see the impact that he would have had at City. I agree with Isaac as well. Lockie Wales, I don't think he's a huge loss. I don't think he was terrible, but I just think it gets to a stage where it's yep, we're moving on. We're just not happy with what we're getting from you. I don't think Dean Bazanis is much of a loss either. I think when Tom Glover came in, he did a fantastic job. So, I mean, we all know Dean Bazanis, what was it? Al Hassan Toure, that goal in the FFA Cup final, that was pretty annoying. So, not too disappointed to see the back of him, to be honest. And then, other than that, I like the loan deals as well.
Don't make me bring up that sad brand photo. I'll do it every episode if I have to, just about that Adelaide game, because I know it resonates with you. I know it hurts you every time we talk about it. But yeah, I'd echo the same statement. I think Brillante leaving is huge. I think that's a really tough one to replace. Not since we had Aaron Moy have we had someone that, as a singular player, could dictate tempo in midfield and could do both good things both sides of the ball. He was always, usually that first outlet through midfield. Very rarely gave it away, even if it is just a short, sharp pass from a centre back to a full back or whatever else. It still helps that rotation, helps that movement. And then the other part, and we might talk about this further when we get to our preferred lineups, which are coming up in a little bit. I think he did a lot of work to cover the likes of Berenguer, the likes of Luna, some of those midfielders alongside him that aren't necessarily as defensively inclined. Susueta, super interesting one, because I don't feel like he ever got fully fit. But now, looking back on it, I'm wondering if he's just that style of player where he's never going to be that guy that runs 16Ks a game or anything like that, because he definitely had flashes of quality. He took touches here and there and you thought, oh, he's on another level to everybody else. But, it never quite hit top gear. I don't think there are any games where you'd say he was the man of the match, so to speak. But he definitely had that there.
Did he actually start many games? Thinking back on it, or was it mainly off the bench?
It took a few weeks. I think the challenge was he didn't actually play that many starting games before we went back into lockdown. So I think he got to that point where he was in the starting 11, maybe made 2 or 3 appearances, and then we went into lockdown, had that big gap, and he never came back after that. So it's a bit hard to gauge where he is. The big one that neither of you guys have mentioned is Denny Jonro. I really enjoyed Denny Jonro as a player. I thought he, on the ball, was perhaps one of the better youngsters that we've got. We've got some fantastic athletes, which we'll talk about further in our preferred lineups. But as far as like ball playing playmakers could go, I think he was excellent. We saw him go overseas with John Van Skip, who obviously rated him very highly, and play in the Eredivisie, and he made more appearances than most of the players that go over to European clubs that early in their career. He just needs a team, and maybe this will happen for him now that he's gone to MacArthur. He just needs a club that's going to let him be what he is, which is that main playmaker and that main creative hub in a side. It could be a challenge for MacArthur because now he's joined by Susueta and Exteberia, but we'll talk about them in the next few weeks. But Jean Rowe, I think he could have been something fantastic. But again, my bias is skewed by Football Manager ratings, and he had 5-star potential. So he was always one that I look forward to playing with each year. The big question though, guys, we've spoken a little bit about the players out, but we've also got a huge change happening off the field as well. Patrick Kisnorbo stepping up from an assistant manager role last season again with Eric Monbert. He was an assistant under Warren Joyce as well. He now gets his opportunity to lead the A-League side for the first time. Isaac, what are some of your thoughts on Kisnorbo? What's the biggest challenge for him making the step up from assistant to permanent manager?
Well, I think the thing with Kisnorbo is this is the right time. Coronavirus aside, I think there was probably a contingency plan for him to take over for Eric, even though probably there was an assumption that Eric was going to last one season longer. But I think he's had good experience. He's won the Y League, he's won the W League, he's worked under a whole host of different managers now. I think he understands how the City Football Group want to play. He understands how Melbourne City want to play. And what's encouraging is, from all accounts, he really has started to take over that role last year, in that he was running a lot of training sessions. He clearly has a good rapport with the players. So I think it's the right time for him to jump on. I think my heart is worried that it doesn't work out. Not that I think that'll happen, but I mean, it'd kill me if it just didn't take off and he had to leave the club, because he has had such a storybook career at Melbourne City. And I'm hoping he can take us to the next level and help us get that one step further.
What are some of your thoughts, Brian, on Kisnorbo's coaching journey and his jump to the main role?
Well, again, I agree with a lot of what Isaac said. I think this is the perfect time. I think his resume is absolutely perfect. His history with the club is huge. I think that's just going to have a massive factor in understanding, how the league works, how the club works, its philosophy, its focus, that rapport with the playing group, with assistants, backroom staff, everything. I think that's going to be fantastic. His whole coaching sort of experience has been with City, in the Y League and the W League. So again, I think that's great. He was a former club captain. I think he's going to do a really good job. And I think when you compare him to someone like Aloisi, I think when Aloisi took over, he had previously managed our Y League team as well and then stepped into the top job. I think Kisnorbo's got, a lot more experience. It's been a lot more gradual, his build-up, and I think he's now primed and ready to go.
Yeah, I think you both make excellent points. I think what's fascinating is, as you kind of look back over his career, he had a fantastic career in the old NSL in those final seasons. He really jumped out right at the end of the NSL era, went over to the UK, where he had a long career in England and Scotland, was at Leeds, was at Leicester, a variety of big clubs, and playing week in, week out. Perhaps a little bit underrated for the national team because of the quality of defenders that he was in alongside in terms of that overall group that was available. But even his career, he came back, he played for Melbourne Heart, so he was there during that transition, that buyout period that we've already discussed. He was a youth coach to start with, then the Y League manager. He won the Youth League, which is the first real trophy that he's got for the club. He then moved to the W League assistant role, was then a co-coach with playing manager Jess Fishlock, then was the head coach, won the W League as well. Potentially, if he can win an A-League, and this is getting way ahead of it, would be the first coach, I think, to win a Youth League, W League and A-League combination, which would be absolutely massive. He's done the longest possible apprenticeship as far as managers is concerned. He's been an assistant manager, not just to one person and then moved up to the top job. He's been there for 3-4 different coaching regimes. He learnt from JVS, he learnt from Warren Joyce, for better or worse with Warren Joyce. He's learnt from Monbear, so he's done a long apprenticeship. I think the closest comparison that potentially we have is with Sydney FC and the transition that they put together after Graham Arnold left and Corica going from, youth coach to youth manager to A-League manager, obviously missing that W-League gap. But, they've really shown the way how to do that transition and how to do it right from an older, more experienced manager to give a younger manager an opportunity to build upon what they've done previously. And I think their transition, arguably, they actually got better, at least in terms of their silverware and trophy wins and all that sort of stuff after Arnold left. My hope is that Monbear's laid the foundation, and it's a very, not simple step up, because it's obviously going to be very challenging in a variety of ways for Kisnorbo, but I really hope that, he's done his due diligence and he's done his apprenticeship and he knows what Monbear's intentions were for that second season or where he thinks the club needs to go to move forward. And so far, what we've seen in the pre-season, there haven't been that many games and results. I think just the one friendly victory, or I shouldn't say victory, one friendly against the victory, which we won in 90 minutes, but then lost in 135 minutes, or however they worked it. But it looks like he is following that same model that was used last year and that same style, which brought us relative success. My only hope is, and I think you touched on it, Isaac, is that he's given the time. If we're going to do it, just commit to it. Like, if we're going to go on potentially a rebuild journey or a coaching development journey, then let's do it for 2 years. Let's just commit to that. And then if at the end of that 2-year contract we aren't happy or we aren't at the progression point we want, that's fine. I think A-League sides in general are a little bit spoilt by our exposure to the games in other parts of the world where the pressure is a lot higher, where if we are sitting not on top of the division, 10 games in, 20 games in, people are going to start getting itchy trigger fingers. I wouldn't be worried in that aspect because I think, one, we're going to talk about in a moment with the players under contract and the transfers in, we have got a pretty solid group for the next 2-3 years. So hopefully we're also making that commitment to having a solid coaching structure for the next 2-3 years so that they can all kind of work in tandem. But it's going to be, yeah, go for it, Brent.
So I was going to say, I do have a quick question. So when Monbear first joined the club, the rumour is that he held a team meeting, and in that team meeting, he walked straight in and did, I think it was something like 10 or 15 chin-ups to sort of like assert his dominance over the squad and sort of, show off. Monbear's like 60-something. What do you guys think the equivalent for Patrick Kisnorbo would be? If he had to come in there, how many chin-ups do you reckon he'd have to do? He's a lot younger. He's got some big guns under those shirts. What do you reckon the equivalent?
When footballers retire, some of them get fat, and then some of them get absolutely huge. And Patrick Kisnorbo is bigger and more muscular than he ever was in his playing career. I don't know.
So
it wouldn't surprise.
Number of chin-ups.
Well, here's the thing. It would not surprise me if Patrick Kisnorbo is the first one in the gym at the City Footballing Academy in Bundoora every day, just bench pressing some of the youth team players. But I'll let Isaac go first because mine's a stupid one, so we might try and get a legitimate answer first.
If you're looking for a legitimate answer, I'm so sorry.
Legitimate answer to a joke question. Here we go.
I think if I was PK, and I often think that I am, I would take my shirt off. Yep. I would bring out the boxing gloves and say, who wants to spar? Assert his dominance, let everyone know that he is top dog. And if anyone wants to come for the king, then let it be. Because I back PK in every day.
That's good. I like that.
Mine was actually similar. It was going to be Fight Club. Like, just put down the gloves. Whoever wants to come after him can come after him. And I don't think anybody would be stepping up. I don't look...
Oh, Jamo would. 100% he'd back himself in.
Yeah, but he's got that Chihuahua mentality where he'd bark a lot and then lay on his back immediately. So yeah, I don't look at our squad and see a whole bunch of hard men. So I don't think anyone's setting up to pack his Norbo. I don't know if you guys know this, but during his time at Leeds, in one of his debut games early on in his Leeds career, he actually got a head knock and had to wrap his head up. And a lot of Leeds fans thought it was a good luck omen. So for a period, he continued to wrap his head up with that fake bandage around it like a rugby player. Even though he had no cut, he wasn't bleeding. It was just a good luck charm that anyone to, I think, convey that message that he was incredibly hard, willing to do anything on the defensive line. But yeah,
whatever works, right?
Yeah, I don't even know if we want to put this episode up, because if we say anything critical about Kisnorbo, there's a good chance he'll come around and beat the shit out of one of us, and he very much could do it.
He just spots us in the stands before a game and just walks up and you're like, uh-oh.
I had this is a shit segue, but I used to be very critical of Nick Kalmar. I'm not sure if you remember him from the Melbourne Heart days, and I swear there was a day he scored and he pointed straight at me as though he had heard every little bit of shit that I've been saying about him in the weeks prior. Not on a podcast, just to whoever I was talking to at the time, but maybe the wind carried it to him one day and he gave me loads when he scored a volley. But yeah, I do hope that Kiss Norberg does incredibly well. And if there are any training ground injuries due to our Fight Club response, then hopefully they're just to minimal players and it doesn't impact the team in any way. We'll jump forward now to the players under contract and the transfers in. It is a long list, so we'll fire through it relatively quickly. Under contract from the previous seasons, we have Tom Glover, who of course made his way into the starting 11 as our starting goalkeeper last year. Austrian defender Richard Winbichler. Curtis Good, who's been at the club now for a good few seasons. Adrian Luna into the last year of his deal as one of our 5 international players. Stefan Kolikovsky, who has a fantastic story. He was actually, I think, a Foundation Heart member with his family. He's the first real fan to make it through into the first team. Nathaniel Atkinson, who is... I've put him in the under contract category. He did technically leave and then come back, but he has a contract from last season. Florent Berenguer in his last year of his deal for the French midfielder. And Roston Griffiths, who now at 32 is potentially in his last year with the club of his deal as well. Of those under contract players, anyone that jumps out at you guys immediately as being key and critical to our season ahead? Isaac, I'll go to you first.
I think I would definitely like to keep Luna on. I think he's done really well. The question for me with him is, does he want to stay? He's just lurking his Instagram. He strikes me as a real family man that I don't think his family are here in Australia.
No, so think... just on that, and it's kind of a heartbreaking story. His daughter, and I'm going to get this wrong, and I apologise to anyone that's listening, but I think she has something similar to like a cystic fibrosis, and the government won't let her in because she does require medical assistance. And at the moment where they're living in Uruguay, I think it's state assistance that she has. Because of her additional medical needs, the government will not let her in. They won't let his partner in. So Adrian Luna has been away from his family his entire time with Melbourne City now over a year. So yeah, a heartbreaking story, and it's one that really shouldn't be happening at any point for a guy that's been here and been doing the right things and has permanent stable income. But yeah, sorry Isaac, I interrupted you there.
No, you're right, because hearing that, it seems remote that he will stay. So I think Florent Berenguer, a lot said about him throughout Melbourne City fans, and he's a frustrating player because when he's good, he is a great A-League player, but he can go missing for games on end. So I think this next season will be really telling for him whether or not we want to recommit post this season. So I'll be interested to see how he goes.
And what about for yourself, Bran? Of those under contract players, the few that we've mentioned, who do you think is key and critical? I think there's a couple there, and maybe you'll echo this thought, that maybe our long-term Melbourne City players that we think might be around for a while.
So a couple, I think I agree with Berenguer as well. I think last year he really sort of started to come into his own. He didn't really flourish under Warren Joyce, but I think Mombert was able to get the best out of him, I thought. Sort of unlocked him a little bit. He looked more confident, more free-flowing, and he started to have more impacts and more games. So I would like to see that continue again next season. I think Atkinson is a good re-signing, keeping, however you want to describe that whole situation. I think it's good that he's still at the club. But then the biggest name is one that isn't on that list, Jamie McLaren. I think he is going to be absolutely huge. Won the Golden Boot last year. I mean, that was the big criticism under Warren Joyce as well. We didn't have a goal scorer. Fornaroli wasn't playing. McLaren came in and made an immediate impact, and he was phenomenal last year. He scored a brace in our pre-season friendly against the Victory. He's going to be fired up. If he can perform to the same level again, we are going to be very, very good.
I mean, you've killed one of our future topics with the expected lineups and stuff, but yes, Jamie McLaren, obviously one of the bigger players, and his goals were quality. If you saw those two on Facebook throughout the week against Victory, both of them fantastic finishes. One from the penalty spot, obviously, but the one where he flicked it over the keeper and smashed it in on his left foot, that's a man in form, so to speak. Sorry, Isaac.
I was just going to say that's such a good point, Brent, because Jamie McLaren, he really for us can pull results out of nowhere. If you think back to Western Sydney away when it was 2-0 and Lockie Wales crossed that ball into him, he won it in stoppage time. Don't forget Western United away when we were down to 10 men, and he can just pull results out of games like not many A-League players can. So he's pivotal. I mean, if at some point he wants to try his hand at Europe again, that's fine, but let's re-sign him and at least get a fee, get something for him. Let's keep him here as long as he wants to be here.
Yeah, I mean, he's on a good deal. If Football Manager is to be believed, he's on a pretty decent designated player contract. But again, I don't know how much faith we can actually take in these figures. But again, I'm going to keep referencing it all throughout the year. I think the two that we didn't talk about are Tom Glover and Curtis Good. I think Curtis Good, getting him locked down, like I think he's 27, 28 now. If we can give him like a couple more seasons, he's I think, a very underrated defender as far as the league is concerned. And he's a Melbourne boy, like his family's in and around the same suburbs. I think his sister is the president of a community club not far from Melbourne. In and around the local suburbs of Melbourne. He's obviously been overseas before and struggled to get game time. He is getting probably his most consistent run of games and starting 11 appearances in terms of his entire career. So I hope he's one we can lock down. And then Tom Glover, I think, falls into that same category. You just mentioned, Isaac, of players that potentially could have, would have, should have been over back in Europe again. But given that he is relatively young and it is difficult for, I think, younger goalkeepers to get first team opportunities, the hope is that we lock him down for 4 or 5 years, and then once he gets to his mid to late 20s or prime period for keepers, then he can make the jump back across, similar to like a Vukovic or something like that. Sorry, Bran, I know you had one.
No, all good. No, just quickly on Tom Glover, totally agree. We saw once he took the starting job from Dean Pizzanis, he never looked back. He never really looked uncomfortable or out of his depth or anything. And even in the grand final, had we won, I reckon he would have been man of the match. I thought he was phenomenal on that day as well. On a big stage, huge occasion for the club, he really stepped up.
Yeah, I mean, he threw one in the back of his net against Victory just to give me a heart attack. But I guess when you're a 21, 22-year-old keeper, that stuff's going to happen. So we have to be patient with all those sort of guys. But it's not a bad core of people that we're keeping from last season's squad. Now we get to go to the exciting part, and I think the part that a lot of people love chatting about, the transfers in. Obviously, this season, a lot of different clubs, and thankfully we've had Sydney FC and Melbourne City up top, or up first as far as these previews are concerned, because they actually have made player movements. There isn't as much international recruitment across the league as what we've seen in previous years. So a lot of the moves that we're going to talk about here are Australian talent, but they are Aidan O'Neill joining on a free transfer from Burnley via Central Coast Mariners and the Brisbane Roar, where he spent time on loan in the league itself. Andrew Naboo makes the rare crosstown switch from Melbourne Victory. Technically, via Perth, like that Nathaniel Atkinson one. The Atkinson one's interesting, actually. I should mention that. I wasn't super fussed when he was announced as going to Perth because it was prior to the end of last season. It was well in advance of the final series. But then he arguably had his best game in a City shirt in that grand final, and it's kind of a good thing that he's come back. And similar with Andrew Naboo, obviously for those of you not aware or could be international viewers or listeners, Andrew Naboo signed for Perth Glory due to lockdown and state border restrictions in Perth. Neither Atkinson nor Naboo was able to join the Perth Glory squad. It was going to be a few weeks before they were allowed entrance into Western Australia. Plus, there was potential that their families were not going to be able to join along with them. So both of their contracts got cancelled by Perth Glory, who didn't want to pay them during that period if they couldn't have them there in training. Because of that, we've managed to pick both of them up, which is very interesting. So Naboo, technically from Melbourne Victory, kind of from Perth as well. Marco Tilio, promising youngster, joins from Sydney FC on a free transfer. Matt Sutton, promising goalkeeper, backup keeper last season for the Victory, moves across town as well. Very highly rated youngster, Taras Gomolka, joins from Adelaide United. And Ben Garuccio, who started his career with the Melbourne Heart and made his first senior appearance for Melbourne City, joins, returning from Hearts of Midlothian over in Scotland. Gentlemen, of those 6 transfers in, which of one, well, you can go through all of them if you feel like it, but which of those strike out at you as being the biggest and most important for the group? Bran, I'll go to you first.
I like the signing of Andrew Naboo, to be honest. I think he's an upgrade on Lachlan Wales. He had a difficult season last year with the Victory, but they were a very poor team. So I think you can sort of chalk that up. You know, he had a tough year and overall what was a tough campaign. I think Gomolka coming across from Adelaide, I think he's going to be very good as well. There's big raps on him. And then Marco Tilio as well. He won the Wiley Golden Boot last year with Sydney. So that's impressive as well. I think he's going to be exciting.
And same question for yourself, Isaac. Any of those that jump out at you, and what do you expect for them for the season ahead?
Well, I agree with Bran on the 2 youth players we got in from Adelaide and Sydney respectively. I think it's always a good sign when opposition fans are disappointed to lose a player, and that seemed to be the vibe from both Adelaide and Sydney. So going on that, I'm excited to see what they can do. Like I mentioned before, I think Aidan O'Neill is probably the best player we could get in the current climate. I've watched him play a bit, and he's a very good player, and I'll be very interested to see how he goes filling the hole that Josh leaves behind. Naboo, I mean, Brand said it perfectly. He is an upgrade on Lockie Wales. I mean, you would argue that he wasn't in his best form in Melbourne Victory, but as has been pointed out, he was in a poor team. But if he couldn't get back to even, half the form he was at for the Newcastle Jets, that is a very, very good player. So, and, Sutton, backup goalkeeper, hopefully he does the business. And it's always good to have as many Hart players in the team as you can get. So generally there's no signings there that don't please me. So the club have done well this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, the one we didn't mention is Garuccio. He's a little bit of a strange one because he probably had his best season in the A-League not at Melbourne City when he made the jump across to Adelaide United. He is South Australian from his heritage, and that got him his move over to Scotland. He actually, I think he did his ACL as well. So he's probably looking for a bit of stability in a club that's going to give him an opportunity to continue his rehab and get him back out on the park again. It's an interesting one because I think we do have our club captain, of course, Scott Jamieson, is, really the starting left back. It'll be interesting to see if that means a change of role for Garuccio or if he's being brought in effectively as a backup option on that side. He's a pretty good player to have as a backup option anyway. So I think a lot of those people that we've spoken about, promising youngsters, players from in and around the league itself as well, it gives us probably more depth across our positions than potentially we've had in previous seasons, which does take us up nicely to what we're going to jump into, which is our expected and preferred lineups for the season. Right, jumping in now to our dream teams as well. We've all gone through and we've all followed pretty much this same 4-3-3 structure. Of course, during the week we have briefly mentioned Melbourne City played against Melbourne Victory, and that gave us a little bit of an insight into how Paddy Kisnorbo is going to line the side up this year. Of course, it could change, but for the sake of discussion, for the sake of consistency, we've all followed that same structure. Isaac, your team is up first. Would you like to talk us through this shape and this lineup that you've gone with?
Yeah, so essentially my ethos around how I think the team's going to shape up, I think Patrick Kisnorbo understands the lineup isn't broke, so why fix it? I think he's going to do things pretty similar to how they were, with the addition of Aidan O'Neill coming in place of Josh, who's left for overseas, and Andrew Naboo stepping up and taking Lockie Wells' position on the wing. So I think, again, things will probably shape up pretty similar to how they were last season. A position that we actually just touched on, Scott Jamieson, I think is an interesting player. I love him as a player. He is truly one of the players that plays for the shirt. I'm not sure that he is objectively our best starting left back, especially with Ben coming in. And, I personally rate Scott Galloway pretty highly. I think he does start the season because he is our captain. And I understand that a lot of what he offers is how demanding he is on the pitch, how he isn't afraid to get stuck in, but he is getting older, and what City require of a left back is demanding. Like, he has to run up and down that pitch, he has to be a part of the attack, while also tracking back. And I noticed the pattern last season. Some teams really did flood his side, and it could be quite fruitful for opposition. So while I think he starts, Scott Jamieson I'm probably not necessarily married to, and it's just going to have to see how the season unfolds.
It's a fascinating point, actually, that you mentioned him. We'll talk about where I've positioned Scott Jamieson when we get to my lineup in a little bit, but he actually didn't join after the lockdown break last season, and the team didn't do that horrifically without him. Arguably, you'd say some of the players that came in, like Galloway, like Atkinson, in that same position and role also performed incredibly well. The interesting part, though, is he did play that kind of inverted wing-back role. He did join in midfield onto Melbourne, particularly in the first half of the season. But yeah, a fascinating one. But by all means, continue to run us through the rest of the lineup.
And so then I at the back, Goodwin, Bidcler, I think they're pretty much stapled on, especially, as things stand, we don't have Harrison Delbridge. He's off contract, so I think they'll stay. I think Nathaniel Atkinson is really starting to show us his best football. I think especially in that post-lockdown, he was probably the best Nathaniel Atkinson I've seen. And then, so Aidan O'Neill at the back, Luna and Florin in front. I prefer Florin in midfield than I do on the wing. We saw him there a bit with under Warren Joyce, and he never seemed too comfortable there for me. And I think the front three is a lock. I think it's a pretty formidable A-League front three, especially given the current climate where, a lot of teams have downgraded as opposed to improved. I think these boys are going to get it done. I think Craig Noon will be better served after his first season in the A-League, and I'm expecting him to come on stronger next year.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to. I think you've drawn on your own comparisons there. I think Luna's an interesting one, as is Berenguer. We spoke about the loss of Brillante and how good a job he did covering defensively for a lot of his partners in midfield. I think potentially, and yes, we've all gone with this 4-3-3, but potentially there might be some structural changes to try and really replace. How do you replace Brillante's work rate? Maybe you do it with two players instead of one. I think Luna and Berenguer, it's going to be very interesting to see how their roles potentially change in potentially a stricter midfield structure to try and cover that defeat. Not that Aidan O'Neill isn't a great player, but he's obviously 23 as opposed to Brillante, who's been in and around the league since he was a teenager, has played in Europe and is heading back there again. I think it's just they're two different players and they may approach their defensive roles a little bit differently this season. Bran, I'll hand over to you. Is there anything that jumps out at you on Isaac's lineup? And then I've got one question for both of you as well before we get off this page.
Well, I quite like it, to be honest. I think that I would agree that that's probably our best starting 11. Again, I would agree on Jamison that he is not irreplaceable, but I do think that he does deserve to start. I think looking at that, you just slot Nabbout in for Wales and O'Neill for Brillante, and for the most part, things are looking pretty good. Even without Delbridge as part of the squad, I think that's a pretty good 11.
That was actually the question I was about to ask. So you've given me the perfect segue to jump in there, Bran. What an excellent guest you are. If Delbridge does re-sign and if he comes back to the club, do you think he starts ahead of Vin Bickler? Isaac, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. Because especially post lockdown when we had no Jamison, he was even doing some time on the right wing, if I remember correctly, and Ackerson would go to the left. So, I mean, he offers versatility. Would I start him over Wim Bickler? It's a coin toss. I really like Delbridge, so personally, I'd be happy for him to start, but I also really like Wim Bickler. I'm kind of sitting on the fence here. I guess I'd probably have Delbridge on the bench because Delbridge, as we know, he's kind of prone to a red.
Very prone to a red.
He tries his guts out, but he can give away a pen. And I mean, I guess Wim Bickler's got the benefit of having a smaller sample size, which means less mistakes. But yeah, I'd probably keep Wim Bickler and Delbridge on the bench.
Bran, what about you?
I agree. I think it'd be good if we signed Delbridge. I think what Isaac said about his versatility is the main thing. I would start with Bickler as well, but I think the fact that Delbridge can fill that centre-back role or play as a right-back, and then, you put Atkinson on the left potentially, or Garuccio, I think that versatility that he would bring would be key. So I think from a squad depth point of view, and, if there's any injuries, if Curtis Good goes down, Delbridge can play in the centre. If Jamison gets hurt, we can revert to the lineup we had for the grand final last year. So I think he would be a very good squad player and would be primed to step in if there was an injury, or even if Kisnorbo just needed to change things up at the back.
Yeah, I think the fascinating part, and this is probably future spoilers, but in the friendly against Victory, and yes, it's the first friendly, it's way too early to make these kind of decisions, but it was actually Roston Griffiths that partnered Good at the back.
Yeah.
And they both played 90 minutes together. Basically 3 45-minute halves in that game. They played the first 90 minutes, which was effectively the full-strength A-League sides. Vin Bickler played with the youth team in that last 45 minutes. One of the big things, and it started, I think, with Michael Jakobsen when he came across to Melbourne City, is that a lot of players that are from European competitions and haven't played overseas, obviously Vin Bickler played quite a bit in the K-League as well, but they really seem to struggle with the hardness of the pitches, particularly in and around the Melbourne area, just due to the differences in climate. So there were a lot of injuries for Jakobsen that first year, and for Vin Bickler, he's had quite a few soft tissue injuries like calf strains, thigh strains, hamstring strains, which are really, really tough. So I do kind of worry if at 30 years of age he's necessarily got the longevity or the hardness to perform in the Australian winter. And then the other part as well is, we're probably going to be playing on the worst pitches that the A-League's encountered this upcoming season, because we are sharing a lot of venues with the NRL, with Australian rugby as well. So it's a fascinating one. I think I would start Delbridge, but again, don't necessarily rate Delbridge all that highly. We'll talk about some players maybe in my lineup that are out there and available that would be perfect for the club, but Delbridge is kind of that. If you've ever been to a junior game, like an under-12s game, and there's that one kid that hit puberty and he's 2 foot taller than everybody else and he's just kind of big and burly, that's how Delbridge plays the game, and that's how he gives away those free kicks and those red cards, just by going in full-blooded and barreling through people that are a lot smaller than him, and I think that creates challenges. But again, I would also echo the sentiments. It's better that he's at our club than somewhere else.
I can never tell if Delbridge just makes bad decisions or if unfortunate things just seem to happen to him. I think it's a mix of both.
I think it's
sometimes he'll dive in unnecessarily, but then other things where unfortunate things just happen. Even in the grand final, scores a goal, you go amazing, and then offside, you're like, oh.
But the other side of it as well is, do you get yourself into those unlucky situations if you make better decisions in the build-up?
Well,
I think,
yeah, there you go. You make your own luck.
And if there's anyone that can show that defensive unit how to take their game to another level, it's a guy that's played in the Premiership and played in the Championship, which is Kis Norbo. You'd think he's the perfect mentor for that sort of player. We're now going to jump into Bran's team. Bran, I'll give you the chance to run us through your lineup as well.
Yeah, so just taking a look at it, it is pretty similar to what Isaac said. I had the same back four, still had Glover in goals. A couple of little tweaks I had was maybe this would be an alternative to Isaac's, not necessarily one over it. But I think maybe having Gamolka in that central defensive midfield position, I would put Luna up on the right wing. We sort of mentioned that we're not too sure of his defensive prowess, whether he'd track back. So I think if we push him up on a wing, he's got more freedom to get forward and leaves us less exposed the back. And then I think Gamolka in the central defensive midfield position, and then O'Neill in the middle as well. And then another thing as well, you mentioned Roston Griffiths before. I think you could potentially swap him in for Gamolka as a central defensive midfielder as well, or potentially as a centre back. So I think there's plenty of versatility. There's a ton of depth in our squad, which I really, really like. There's a lot of players that you can slot in there. Isaac mentioned Galloway as well. I think we've got plenty of versatility, and this is how I think we could approach things differently if we had to, for injury's sake, or if things needed just a little bit of a change-up.
Yeah, you'd say, you mentioned it there. I think it's too early to tell, and I'm drawing way too many conclusions, but we're still a few weeks out from the season. I think it's telling that Gamolka started the friendly against Victory ahead of Roston Griffiths, and that Griffiths was at the back, and that Vin Bicklow didn't start at all. I think, given that they've all been in training for 4 weeks at this point, I think it probably is telling. But everybody that at Adelaide really rated Gamolka very highly. He was, I think, Isaac, you mentioned it, that when players or when fans of a club are disappointed a player's left, nobody at Adelaide really wanted him to go. But he's moved on, and so far the raps seem pretty big for him in how he's doing in his early days at City. The interesting part will be once Aidan O'Neill's fully fit. He's obviously away with the Olyroos at the moment, so he wasn't available for that first friendly. But yeah, again, it's a good problem to have, this depth that we've now got, even with Garuccio and Jameson and Atkinson and Galloway. That's probably the deepest fullback roster or squad that anyone in the A-League has. If we add Delbridge to the mix in those three centre-backs, that's pretty deep and pretty strong. Midfield's pretty deep, pretty strong, and then the front three is probably the one area where you'd say, do we have a plan B for Jamie McLaren? No, we don't, but potentially we don't need one. And we mentioned it in the outbound things. If you give 12 months of football to Rami Nazarene and Mooney Najjar, when we've got them both on contract, and they come back in 12 months' time, we probably have even greater depth in terms of the overall ability of the squad. So, yeah, I think it's interesting what you've done. And again, I don't think there are any wrong answers to this question. We're in a very fortunate position where we sit at the moment. But I'm going to take us off the rails a little bit, because I'm going to walk you guys through my dream team and lineup. So, full disclosure, my background, playing Football Manager here, there and everywhere all over the season. FM21 came out a couple of weeks ago. I have already won the league with Melbourne City, in case you were wondering. And every year I give myself the same challenge where I get rid of all the international players and try and do it with an Australian-only squad, which has given me some fantastic memories. So full disclosure, this is similar to the lineup, but not the exact one that I used in the game itself. I did have Jackson Irvine, who you can get on a free transfer, and Matt Sporanovic, who's still available on a free transfer. And if anyone follows Matt Sporanovic, still just gets coffees every morning in South Yarra. I don't know why he's not playing football or what the situation is, but if we could get him in, I think he'd be perfect. But for the sake of who we've got under contract at the moment, I've brought Roston Griffiths in at the back in place of Vin Bickler to get him out of the squad. My hope would be that Delbridge does rejoin and could potentially be in that position as well. I would probably give Garuccio the nod ahead of Jameson, if I'm being completely honest, at left back, mainly because Jameson's 32 years of age now, and I think, yes, he's a good player, and yes, he's a steady head in the A-League itself, but if we're going to go on this coaching journey with Patrick Kisnorbo that I spoke about earlier, let's try and commit to a side that we can have in the squad for the next 3-4 years. And I think Delbridge at 28, Good at 27, Garuccio at 25, and Atkinson at 22, and Glover in goal at 22 as well. Like, that's a group that we could get good 3-4 seasons out of a defensive unit. Hopefully a coach alongside them as well. I've gone with Gamolka as the anchor as well, but Odin O'Neill I think could easily drop into that position. The one that you guys haven't mentioned and we haven't spoken about all that much is Connor Metcalf. He's the one that I've brought into midfield. He's a player that has promised quite a bit, and I think when we spoke about Denny Genro earlier where I said he's more of a playmaker, Metcalf is definitely more of an athlete, which is has its place in the A-League in particular. He scored a cracking goal for the Olyroos during the week against Macarthur, ended up being the winning goal. And he's shown glimpses for Melbourne City. I think this is a make-or-break season for him potentially as well. Is he going to be that player that can be a starting 11 midfield player at an A-League level, or is he going to be one of the many players that we see cycle through the league that doesn't necessarily make good on their potential? But I think huge opportunities for him as a left-sided central midfielder in this lineup if he can get in there. And up front, I've got Garuccio, McLaren, and Naboo. The interesting part about this is I think Naboo effectively at Newcastle operated more centrally than perhaps he was given an opportunity to do at Melbourne Victory. And I think he potentially struggled trying to slot into a role complementary to Toivonen and complementary to Cruz when he was fit, and Marco Rojas and whatever else. And I think that provided challenges. The parallels that I draw between McLaren and Naboo would be the partnership we saw in the A-League over the last couple of seasons between a poaching striker, Adam Lafondra, and Costa Barbarouses, more of a wide player playing in an upfront too. So it would not shock me if there's a 4-3-3, which is our plan for when we want to try and play at home, keep the ball, whatever else, and then maybe away from home or a more defensive structure that has two up top, and it's McLaren and Naboo playing alongside each other, but Naboo moving into wider positions to try and pick up pockets of space and hopefully drag defenders away from McLaren. I think the format is there from what Sydney FC have done over the last few years for that sort of partnership. And I think if you're going to write down two players that potentially could replicate those roles and replicate that structure that's worked so well for Sydney, that's maybe something we could see. But again, I think this just goes to show that we've got a very good Australian core that we're working with for the season ahead. I'll let you guys jump in with any comments. If you want to tear this apart, by all means, go ahead. Isaac, any thoughts on the Australian group that we've got?
I like it. And I mean, not to make this too much of an echo chamber, but I really agree with the sentiments that going through these three lineups has really highlighted that we do have a pretty remarkable amount of depth, considering a remarkable amount of depth, considering the current climate. And you're right, a lot of these players could make a claim for the starting 11. Connor Metcalf for the Olyroos the other day was incredible. Like, not just his goal, which was gorgeous, but he was seeing so much of the ball. He was dictating play. He was doing really well, and I think his future is at City. I mean, will he make his way into the starting 11? It depends on Flo's form, how some other players do, but I want to keep him for as long as we can because I've really enjoyed watching his progression. Also, something that I feel like we haven't really highlighted is what's going on with Gamolka's hair.
This photo is over 12 months old. It's the best one I could find, and I put it in the little format and structure that we've got. He doesn't have any in the City colours yet. Okay. Hopefully he's sorted out that barn out. But he is 12 months older. I think he was 16 when this was taken. He's still only just turned 18, I think. So still a young man. I can't look back at, like, if you look at photos of me in high school, I look like an absolute dickhead as well. So I can't really be too critical of him at all. But
those in glass houses, I would trade his hair for mine. But I was just going to say, honestly, looking at this, it looks like it's trying to leave his head, which is just interesting. But that's something I took away.
You can take them. Hey, the boy's coming out of Adelaide now, so he's got access to more like cafes and barbershops than any other city in Australia. I think he's going to be fine for this upcoming season. Sorry, Bran, I think I cut you off there.
No. I feel like that's the kind of haircut that you can only pull off if you are A, very, very young, or B, you're like the top scorer in the Premier League. So right. I think he's either got to sort it out, or he's got to go on and just crush it in Europe. But I mean, I like it. I couldn't pull it off. I wouldn't be brave enough. So full credit to him.
I am curious. It's not the haircut of a defensive midfield enforcer. Let's put it that way. But I wonder if at any point we've spoken about. I think it was maybe Sir Alex Ferguson or someone to do with Arsenal maybe that made all of those players go and like kind of cut their hair shorter way back in the 90s. It would not surprise me if we see a starting 11 round one of Patrick Kisnorbo skinheads just running straight out there on the pitch if they're going to follow his haircut throughout the course of the year, just to try and get that mentality out there. Like a boot camp style thing.
Skinheads with the, what is it, the lucky headband, the lucky head tape.
Tape. Just tape up someone's head. That's all we really want to see for the rest of the season.
Just very quickly, coming back to our dream teams, Kolikovsky as well. We didn't mention him in there, but he could easily play on the right wing instead of Naboot as well. I think he's a little bit of an unknown where there's plenty of potential. I don't see him necessarily as getting a huge look in the starting 11, but he could make an impact and really force his way into that team if, there's injuries or opportunities, FFA Cup games, or actually even playing the FFA Cup this year. Have they canned that yet?
No, I think there's one in 2021. So 2020 is done. That was cancelled. I think the intention is still to have 2021 go ahead, but it won't start until March.
Okay, so we may or may not get opportunities in the FFA Cup. Yet to be seen, but I think he could potentially make an impact as well.
Yeah, I mean, that front three, that's probably... I think this is arguably the best depth of any club in the division because we've still not put... None of us have put Scott Galloway, and he's a A-League quality defender in our lineup. None of us have put quite a few different players. I've obviously left out all the internationals, which makes it a bit easier, but that front three is really the only area. If Noon or Naboo goes down, Kolikovsky's going to have to jump in because Nazarine's off now. We know Atkinson can play further forward. We know that Garuccio can play further forward, but yeah, that is probably the one area where you'd say maybe we're a little bit light. But again, there are still 4.5 weeks until the season starts. There is still international transfer windows. We don't know what the club is working on. But Kolikovsky, be a great story to see him get first team football. And we'll see how the season plays out as far as the rest of it is concerned. But again, all three of them, fantastic lineups. I don't think we have any major concerns or issues to worry about. And we just really have to hope that this team stays fully fit and ready to go for the full season because long-term injuries can strike at any particular opportunity. But we're going to jump back in, gentlemen. We've got a couple more rounds to get through, and I want to get your thoughts on the upcoming season as well. So, going through our expected and preferred lineups, they're, of course, very interesting. We've spoken at depth or at length about Patrick Kisnorbo and his full coaching group. Des Buckingham's come across from Wellington Phoenix to join. He himself has done quite a long journey as an assistant manager in and around the league. Had a brief spell leading Wellington when Dario Kalezic, I'm probably butchering that name, or I've remembered it incorrectly, was sacked at the end of one season, but he comes with a wealth of experience in the league itself. They've kept quite a few of the previous coaching, physio and scouting groups together, continuing to add scouting talent from international clubs as well. They've got two Englishmen that have come across from the Manchester City football group, James Poole and another one whose name I can't remember. Peter Kraki, a long-time Czechoslovakian coach, is now coaching the youth league side. He has a very strong record of youth recruitment and coaching at a high level in Europe. But the one that I want to talk to you guys about is the active support. Obviously, in previous seasons, the Melburnians have existed. They are no longer around, and unfortunately for quite a few of the clubs that we're going to talk about, the active support isn't necessarily represented right now. We all take games in a little bit differently. We all sit in slightly different areas. We've all, as you've mentioned, Brian, participated in away days. The biggest challenge, I think, for Melbourne City fans is trying to get more people involved and invested in the game. We are the fourth highest membership group in the league itself, not that you're a member, and Melbourne Victory fans are always going to refer to us as the Green Seed Elite. But one of the things that maybe the club could do better, the league could do better, is pitching memberships, pitching attendances to fans or potential fans out there. So what I wanted to ask both of you guys to do is to kind of go through and put together your membership pitch or slogan. Maybe not league-wide, maybe not it's a full marketing campaign, but just how would you try and convince someone that hasn't been to an A-League game to give it a chance and to get down and watch one of the teams play, and maybe specifically, because we're a bit biased, Melbourne City as well. Isaac, I'll give you the first chance. What would your membership pitch or slogan be to a potential fan?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of things I want to touch on here. For a new fan, I feel like the A-League is a very unique beast. It's not like any football league in the world. It's super accessible. I feel like there's a genuine community feel behind supporters of your club, other clubs. There's a real togetherness. Hey, there's not many of us, so let's have a good time. And I think the A-League it's a beautiful league and you'll never be bored. However, I think from a Melbourne City perspective, while it is so important for us to attract new supporters and to help the club grow, I think the onus also needs to be put on the Melbourne City supporters that we've lost along the way. Because I mean, when I first went to games, there was, usually 10 to 11,000, and year by year it's kind of dropped off. The terrace, under whatever name it's going under, is dropping off bit by bit. And I think I understand that because, City can be a frustrating club to support. But I think at the moment we're in a really good way. The skies are blue, everything's looking positive. So I think it's about getting your mate who hasn't been to a City game in a season or two and has kind of gone off it. It's about getting them back. It's about getting the terrace full. If you remember the 10-year anniversary game, I mean, cold, miserable night, 6,000 there, but the terrace was full and it was in great voice because a lot of old heads came out. And you just think, wow, this is on a rainy night against Central Coast. We could have this every week if, the people that at one point loved the club just rock up. So I think it's really important to get back the people that we've lost on the way, as well as generating new supporters.
Yeah, I mean, and we're finally good. We're finally a good team. Like, I don't know why it's such a difficult thing for people to get down. But I think, this is not going to be a popular opinion. And by all means, everyone can torch me in the comment section below. But I think we speak about Melburnians obviously folding and Melbourne Victory folding. And to an extent, it's understandable why those supporter groups have folded in and around Melbourne community, because the support from the A-League wasn't there. The support from the clubs it's difficult to get club support, to be honest, because a lot of these were Victorian police issues, and it was more about how they govern A-League games. And a club, it's not necessarily the club's responsibility to try and broker peace or try and broker better match day agreements. Really, the club is forced to follow Victorian police instruction. That should have been an FFA thing. And obviously, FFA administration has changed quite a bit over the last few seasons, but I do think that too many of the fan groups became perhaps too invested in their own importance to the game and their own importance to the club. And don't get me wrong, I want all the fan groups there and I'd love to see Melburnians back and in the stands, but the reality is the game's continued. New people like Isaac are still getting to games. We've all probably taken people to games over the last few days, weeks, months, seasons, whatever else, and they've enjoyed the experience. It's not, no football team, no football club is bigger than one particular fan group. And I think there's that element of certain fan groups, maybe not necessarily Melburnians specifically, but they think their own importance to the game is perhaps more inflated on what it actually is. The reality is the most important thing should be the club and should be the team and how they're performing and getting around them for whatever else. That's easy for me to say because I sat through wearing a Melbourne Heart turtleneck in 40-degree heat, and I sat through the John Aloisi era, and I sat through I sat through all of that shit that we went through. I didn't necessarily hate this experience of supporting a club that was effectively shit. But, at the same time, you've got to manage that give and take. If you disappear and are one of those fans that was at games and then left, the only thing that you've done is prevented that scenario from ever getting any better and prevented that support from ever getting any bigger and louder and more vociferous. All the stuff that people wanted from those games, that wanted from the club itself, they're really putting more obstacles in the way to us actually getting to that point and getting to a successful and healthy league and club as well. I've gone off on a little bit of a tangent, but we've got time to kill, so it's all good.
No,
Brand,
sure.
Yeah, sorry, Isaac.
Are doing a really good job, and they're coming at it about the right way, and they kind of share my spirit of we just want people in stands. We just want people. We all love City, and it doesn't need to be any more complicated than that. Let's just go have a good afternoon out at the football. So yeah, I do think the people in charge of City Terrace at the moment are doing a great job.
Oh, for sure. And credit's got to go to the club as well. I'm still on price freeze from 4 or 5 years ago. So it is, if you got in early, and even now, it's a pretty decent return on your membership. Obviously, 2020 kind of goes out the window with the different lockdown restrictions. Those aren't necessarily the club's fault or responsibility, but I think they do a good job in terms of their membership packages and offerings of trying to get people down there as well. So again, I'm not being super critical or shitting on anyone that's actually there now. It's more just, the people that used to be there that kind of walked away from it. Why did you really walk away from it if not other than, your own importance? Because the club's doing well on the field, off the field. We are getting bigger. We are getting further and further ingrained into the Melbourne City, into the Melbourne culture as well. It's not as we spoke about at the start, Brand. It used to be like 1 out of every 12 people was supporting Melbourne Heart. It's now actually getting closer to being, 1 out of every 4 is a Melbourne City supporter, which is fantastic to see. Brand, I'll spin over to you now. Membership pitch and slogan for anyone that might be umming and ahhing about coming down to an A-League game or specifically joining Melbourne City for the season.
Well, I don't have a specific catchy slogan, unfortunately, but I think the big membership sort of pitch would be there's been no better time to be a City fan than right now. Like, everything off the field seems to be in place, well structured. On the field, we've got a good core group of players. We're playing well. Everyone talks about bandwagoners and fair weather supporters, but playing well really, really helps. So, there's a good product on the field. So I think we're very watchable. We're very likable at the moment. One thing that I really think is finally starting to happen is we're starting to sort of establish ourselves as the top dogs of Melbourne. As soon as the City Football Group became part of the Heart, you're like, all right, here we go. The Victory are no longer the rich team. We're the rich team. We're going to bury them with, better facilities, better coaching resources, better global connections. And that's taken a long time to build. But I think we've built it properly. And I think that's sort of starting to come to fruition now, where we're no longer the little brother. We were the younger brother who was really short, then hit a growth spurt and is now taller than the older brother. I think that's a pretty average analogy now that I think about it, but I think that's the kind of thing that we're going for, where we will soon be bigger than the Victory. So I don't think there's a better time than now to really jump on board. As far as active support goes, I totally agree with what Isaac said. I think all of us in our origin stories talked about how we went to games and the atmosphere, the fans got us hooked. So the active support, similar to you, Isaac, I grew up, as an AFL fan. So the active support is really what sort of differentiates us from the AFL and other codes. So I think that is key to attracting fans. As far as the terraces go, there generally seems to be a lot of politics in the terrace, whether that's between different terrace groups, between the terrace and the club, terrace and the police, terrace and other fans, whatever. So I think that can be toxic. So maybe easier said than done. And this is looking from the outside in. If we can try to avoid that, any sort of animosity between groups, I think the key is to make the terrace as inclusive as possible. I think the downside with the way Amy Park set up, we've got that one middle section for the terrace and we've got those 2 sections on either side, and those 2 sections on either side are always quite empty. And I think the reason for that is people are off-put by the idea of active support. I think the big thing is not making the active area seem too intimidating. So not trying to make it seem like, thugs, Green Street hooligans, stuff like that, carrying on things like flares. We want to try to make it as an inclusive an environment as possible, because the best terrace is a full terrace. We don't have to be the most extreme. I think, we've seen examples with the Victory, the North Terrace, that does not work. I think we just want to be full and inclusive, and I think that will build atmosphere, fans, fan culture, stadium vibes, everything.
So interestingly, and maybe we can go around the group and show where our seats and stuff are. I'm actually in one of those side areas, and I have been since.
Well, why do you sit there?
Well, see, I'm a bit different.
Honest question, not having a go or anything.
No, I like that seating area. So I'm just to the right. So as you're looking at the pitch from the Swan Street end, I'm just to the right of the goal and basically the 6-yard box, and I think it gives you a great angle to I like watching games quite a bit because I'm a bit analytical and I've got like a coaching and playing background, so I kind of like to see as much as possible, whereas standing and clapping and singing and whatever else, that's fantastic. Like, it's absolutely worthy as part of the game, but it's not necessarily what I want to take out from it, or it's not necessarily how I kind of go through it. But I'm a firm believer that I need to have a seat in that area because that's the home end, and your home end in football is the one that's supposed to be full, the one that's supposed to have a whole bunch of different areas and whatever else. I think at different points it's been suggested, so it's 3 bays at Amy Park that are the active support areas, and in certain seasons previously they've said that they're standing only, and now they don't anymore. It's just active support, stand, sit, do whatever you want. I think maybe they need to consolidate that to the central area as being stand only for the people that want to stand, chant, whatever else, and then maybe take those other 2 bays and just call them like active family and put kids there, because kids will stand up regardless. And then I think one of the best imagery pieces that we have, or one of the best advantages that Amy Park has, is that when it bursts for a goal at an end, you see the crowd start moving and jumping up to their feet. And I think that adds a bit to it as well. Not that I'm taking away from anyone in a terrace who stands throughout the 90 minutes, but I think Melbourne City's best inroad, or perhaps best route to getting new eyes in it, is a lot of young players and a lot of young kids as well, and their families in and around those games.
No, I just want to touch on that and build on that, because I totally agree. I think maybe the biggest area for improvement isn't the active area, so to say. It's that sort of in-between thing that you mentioned, that semi-active area. And I think that's sort of like a good introduction, a good intermediate. You're nearby, you don't have to stand up all the time, you don't have to sing all the time, but it's easy to feed off that vibe and get involved. Of course there'll be occasions where you do have to, where you do want to stand up, or you do want to sing, or you do want to get involved. So I think that sort of in between ground, that's semi-active, or as you said, what was it, family active, or
like the two bays either side, make them family active. Because what I see consistently, and I don't know if you guys have different experiences, but there'll be family groups of kids, and there'll be kids that are like 10, 11, 12, who are too young to be in active support right now, that stand there and look at what they're doing and try and copy it in different areas. So I think if you've got a family group that you can perhaps get in there, and then they have 2 or 3 seasons until that kid is 15, 16, 17 years of age, then they can make their own transition across into the actual active bay. That's what I'd want to see, like kind of, how do we bridge that stepping stone between a family membership, which is sitting on the sideline in your little group of 4 with all the other families in kind of quiet zones and areas where they're potentially more focused on the kid's got a ball and he wants to get everyone's signature at the end of a game, so he's going to want to be near the tunnel or whatever else. Like, how do they bridge that gap between what is largely teenagers in the current active support and then, that smaller family group of younger kids, which do represent, I think, probably the largest amount of fans and members that we have at the moment. So, I think they could do stuff a little bit differently to try and engage some of those groups and try and get them in. But having said that, I think the club is doing perhaps better than most other clubs around the league in terms of trying to engage fans and keep it at a respectable level. Sorry, Brandon, I saw your finger up.
No, all good. One very, very last point. If you look at the Premier League and English clubs, they don't seem to have a necessary active area. Like, there's not one section of the grandstand, okay, in certain stadiums there might be one end or something like that is a little bit more active than the rest of the stadium. But it's sort of the whole stadium buys into that vibe, that whole terrace, that whole end. So I think that's the kind of model that we want to sort of look towards, where it's not just necessarily one area, it's sort of the whole stadium and the whole end sort of encompasses that sort of support.
Yeah, and maybe that's the difference between someone pulling the trigger, and if they're listening, please go and do it, and creating like a supporters group or a supporters trust. That isn't necessarily an active group, but it's a reflective community of a bunch of different people across a variety of different membership types, where, as I think Australian active support, and again, I'm going to get shit on in the comments, but too many of them have watched Green Street Hooligans and have poor expectations of what they expect it to be. Some of that's an NSL bygone era thing about, we're going to meet down the road for a fight 20 minutes before kickoff and whatever else. And then another portion of it as well is, players and people in that active area that are there on their way to a night out. Like, I buy the polo or the kit every year because I like to represent the colours, and I think that adds quite a bit to the colour of the stadium. Like, Isaac, I'm sure you mentioned with your first experiences with City, seeing the colour, seeing the vibrancy in that group. Like, let's just get more people just in kits. Like, let's get more scarves in there. Let's get whatever else, so that we are effectively creating a unique either sky blue or red and white environment, whatever floats your particular boat. But a lot of it is just people rocking up in, whatever streetwear they've got for their going out the match after. And the casino will let you in a polo shirt. I've tried it 3 or 4 times. So anybody should be able to get out into their nightclubs after the matches if it's a Saturday night or Friday night kickoff. We covered quite a bit there. It probably went off on the membership pitch, probably went into a little bit more about the active support than anything else.
Yeah, how to fix active support across the entire league in 5 minutes. There we go. We've done it. We've done it.
Yeah, we've solved expansion. We've solved the second division. Active support is fixed. The league, we're going to get 10,000 to every game this season, boys. Just you wait and see.
you solved Jackson Irvine's contract solution as well. He's going to come to Melbourne City on a free.
I had to give him 10k a week, and he's on a designated player deal, marquee deal. But it was worth it. He contributed well. Play him as a Mazzala, get him forward from midfield. He'll bob in a couple of goals here and there. But unfortunately, gents, that does kind of bring us towards the end of the podcast, which we probably could have gone for 3 or 4 hours if we had left it all the way through. The last portion that I kind of wanted to go through with you guys, unfortunately, fixtures still not out. The Independent A-League is taking their time releasing their fixture schedule. Obviously, a lot more logistics challenges this season as well, trying to work in and around the NRL seasons, AFL seasons, all that sort of stuff with a more winter-based competition. So we don't know who we're playing round one, but season predictions, season expectations, we went kind of second in the division, grand final appearance. Those are good steps. But what do you guys think would be passable marks or measures for the season ahead? Isaac, I'll go to you first. What do you think our expectations should be for Melbourne City this season?
Well, as things stand, looking around the league, I think top 2 is pretty much... I can't see us going lower than that. I think Sydney still have, a good core of their team. I mean, yes, they've lost Lafondra, so they've lost a lot of goals there, but they still have a really solid team. MacArthur looked good on paper, but there's a lot of unknown variables there. And I'd argue the same with, the traditional players like Victory. They're in a big rebuild. They've got a lot of internationals who knows how they'll adapt. I think one of City's strengths is that we've got pretty much the same core of players, which is, almost never been the case for as long as I've been following City. It's usually half the team's turned over, and we managed to keep most of the central figures. I think Patrick Kisnorbo is going to keep playing the same style, so I think that'll serve us well. So yeah, I think top 2 in a grand final. I think that's what I expect from this season. Whether or not we win a grand final or we finish first, that I'm less confident to say. But I think we'll be at the top end of the table for sure.
Yeah, I mean, just a casual championship, premiership double. Like, that's, we're on last week. That's what the Sydney FC fans said. They're expecting that, so someone's going home disappointed this year. I can tell you that for sure. Bran, what are some of your thoughts? What should our expectations be for the season itself?
Well, I think for every season, the goal should be to improve on last year. So I think when you look at last year, we finished second and we made the grand final. So I'm not quite taking it to the bank and saying that we're going to win the double, but the natural progression to improve on that would be to either finish first or to win the grand final. So I think either of those has to be the goal. I wouldn't be disappointed if we finish second. I mean, it's hard to tell. It's all context, and we'll see how the season plays out. But I would be expecting top 2, and I think making the grand final should be a legitimate goal.
Yeah, I would echo those same sentiments. In my head, and maybe I'm being too cautious or too negative, I think there will be lessons that Kisnorbo learns along the way. And I think the challenge is going to come from Sydney FC 2 or 3 years further down their premiership cycle. So they know what it takes week in, week out. And they, similar to us, have kept a very strong group together. I think we've got the biggest, or so far, at time of recording, the best overall squad. Is it the best overall 11? Hard to argue. Against some of the other clubs as well. It's definitely, I think, the deepest roster that's in the league itself, which is going to be very important. I think a lot can be said for clubs having set starting 11 positions. Like Sydney FC, maybe the one criticism you could give of them is that you pretty much know who's going to play week in, week out. There's a couple, maybe 1 or 2 positions that alter week in, week out as to who's fit, who's ready to go, what they're trying to do tactically. But most of the time, you know what their lineup's going to be. We've got that consistency now, but we've already spoken about the likes of Garuccio, Atkinson, Galloway. Like, they're going to be all wanting to start every week. So I think that depth gives us a little bit of an advantage in terms of the competitiveness. But having said that, I think Sydney FC are better positioned right now for the league season. But again, on our day, I don't see any reason why we couldn't take it to any of the teams in the league. It will be very interesting to see. Like, I think there's definitely clear tiers between what we've seen in the last league season with City and Sydney being on another level to everybody else. And then beneath that, I think that's maybe we might see that gap close a little bit. I wouldn't be shocked if MacArthur do quite well because they weren't terrible in either of the games that we've seen them play so far in their season or in their pre-season. I think Adelaide's always a danger. I think Western United are largely the same squad they had last season, similar to ourselves. So there's a few Wellington as well, I could include in that as well. They've kept most of their group together. They've made some sharp signings, young Kiwi players coming back from Europe. So I don't think the gap will be quite as big as it was last season. I don't think will be a straight top two shootout. But again, I would like to see us in and around the title challenge come the right end of the season. But I do think there will be some speed bumps along the way, and hopefully everyone's got patience for that as well. Go for it, Isaac.
Just to add really quickly, something we'll have to manage this season that we've never had in our history before is, boys, we're in the ACL, and that'll, that's a different beast. That's something we haven't had to deal with, and that'll be, I mean, who knows how it's going to shape up and how everything's going to go, but that could be midweek international trips that could really test the squad depth, and that'll be just a new challenge for the club.
And again, we have no idea what 2021 is going to look like because 2020 has been such a chaotic year in a variety of aspects. But there is potential that we are the one club at the end of this season that actually has ongoing football beyond the final series, which could be a similar hub competition or Champions League preparations. So even though we spoke about at the start potentially having like an 8 or 9 month off season, depending on the TV rights deal, depending on the season for winter, you make a good point, Isaac. We could potentially be in a continental competition throughout that period. This could be the longest run of football that Melbourne City's had from end to end as far as season is concerned, on top of what has been a shortened off season because of the lockdown restrictions earlier on in 2020. So yeah, fascinating stuff to see. If we do well in the league, if we do well in the cup, I think membership will continue to grow. I think there's a variety of different things on, off, and off the pitch that we're making. Like, we're not taking backward steps. That's, I think, probably the overarching theme, is that we are getting better depth, we are getting better facilities, we are doing whatever else. And the best part for the rest of the league since Melbourne City came in, and Melbourne City, and we didn't even talk about this part, and probably could fill a podcast on its own. We've been Melbourne City now longer than we were ever Melbourne Heart. So, like, we've taken, I think, a lot of different things in and around the league and pushed them to a higher structure in terms of training facilities and women's football investment and youth league investment and coaching investment and all that sort of stuff. And Melbourne Victory has had to step up their game, just as Sydney have stepped up their game, just as Western Sydney now have as well. So yeah, exciting times. I think there's a lot of really exciting stuff happening in and around the club, and if people are wanting to get involved, then yeah, this is definitely the perfect time to pull the trigger on that, because you could be potentially at the start of something special in terms of the overall strength of the squad itself.
So I just wanted to touch on one last final thing. I can't believe we didn't mention the ACL before as well. That is a huge thing for the club, to make it onto that continental stage. And then very quickly as well, we were talking before about how much squad depth we have. If we do have the longest campaign, as you mentioned, Shaun, that might really come into fruition, and that might really work in our favour.
Yeah, hopefully best laid plans. Like, hopefully the ACL that's currently going on at time of recording goes off without a hitch and there are no dramas, and then potentially, if it goes well, maybe they look at hub models in the future for that sort of competition to get everyone in and around the one spot, because the logistics challenges that are probably going to continue into 2021, and like things like international clearances and flights and all that sort of stuff, there's a good chance that we're dealing with those in 12-month time as well. So yeah, huge achievement to be in the ACL. Knowing Melbourne City's luck, it'll probably get cancelled for 2021, but that's fine. We'll deal with that as we work through it as well. Boys, I think we definitely probably could have spoken about Melbourne City for 3.5 hours if we didn't, deliberately reel ourselves back in. But it's been an absolute pleasure having you both on the podcast. Thank you very much for joining us. Isaac, I'll go to you first. Any last-minute plugs that you want to get out there? Where can people find your social media, or where can they find more content of yours if they want to check it out?
My social media is just at Isaac X Wiles. Follow me on Twitter if you want to talk anything A-League, anything football. And I'm working on my first article for the reserve team now, so that should be up soon.
We're all just rubbing our hands together waiting for that one to get up there. But of course, your debut here on the channel, I think it's a pretty easy topic to come in and talk Melbourne City all afternoon. Bran, you're old hat at this point. If people don't know where to find you, I don't know what more we could do for them. But if people want to check out more of your content, where should they head?
Yeah, at Branson Gibson on Twitter. I have a few articles up on the reserve team website as well. If you're interested in the NPL Victoria as well, I do host a podcast, the Semi-Pro Potty, talking all things Victorian NPL.
And of course, as always, links to both Brandon and Isaac's Twitter accounts will be in the description below. Links to the reserve team, links to the semi-pro potty, all that sort of fantastic stuff. Head down there if you want to check out more of the stuff from them and from all of our great contributors over at thereserveteam.com.au. We've got a whole bunch of future season previews coming through, including on top of our additional regular podcast content, our reserve team rankings, our weekend recaps, a variety of fantastic stuff coming your way between now and the start of the A-League and W-League seasons. But really, as always, more than anything, we just appreciate you guys coming along with us for the ride, listening in either on YouTube, on Spotify, wherever else, checking out our articles, all that sort of great stuff. It's fantastic to see and we appreciate it a lot. From myself, from the entire reserve team, thank you so much for watching and we'll see you all again next time.